The raucous laughter of Rosalie Jenkins echoed through the crowded saloon, cutting through the smoky air like a knife and abruptly silencing every patron within earshot. Her laughter hadn't been intentional, a genuine reaction to the pompous speech of Harold Whitmore, one of the wealthiest and most feared men in Copper Creek, Colorado. The year was 1875, and a woman's laughter directed at a man of Whitmore's standing was more than just improper, it was dangerous. Rosalie's green eyes widened as she realized her mistake. The saloon fell deadly quiet, the piano player's fingers freezing mid-note. She pressed her hand to her mouth, but it was too late. The damage was done. "Did you just laugh at me, girl?" Whitmore's voice was eerily calm as he turned to face her, his handlebar mustache twitching with barely contained rage. I meant no disrespect, Mr. Whitmore," Rosalie stammered, taking a step back, her serving tray clutched to her chest like a shield. At 22, she'd been working at the Rusty Nail Saloon for 3 years, supporting herself after her parents died from fever. Her chestnut hair was tied back in a practical bun, and her plain dress was modest compared to the flashy attire of the saloon girls who entertained the miners and cowboys. No one laughs at Harold Whitmore. His eyes narrowed dangerously. No one. The following morning, Rosalie found herself standing on a makeshift wooden platform in the town square, her wrists bound with coarse rope that bit into her skin. The bright Colorado sun beat down mercilessly as Harold Whitmore addressed the gathering crowd. "This woman has insulted my honor," he announced, his voice carrying across the dusty square. "And for that, she must be taught a lesson. He'll bid for a year of her services. A year to teach her proper respect for her betters." Rosalie felt sick to her stomach. Being sold into servitude, or worse for laughing. It seemed impossible, yet here she stood, about to be auctioned off like cattle. "This ain't right, Whitmore," called an elderly woman from the crowd. The girl just laughed. "Silence," Whitmore roared. "I own half this town. The law is what I say it is." He turned to the crowd with a cruel smile. "Now who'll start the bidding?" Several men raised their hands, calling out amounts that made Rosalie's blood run cold. Most were miners or ranch hands known for their cruel dispositions. Some were strangers with cold eyes that raked over her body calculatingly. $50, called one. $75, shouted another. $100, yelled a third, a man whose reputation with women made Rosalie tremble. As the bidding continued, a tall figure on horseback approached from the edge of town. The stranger rode slowly but purposefully toward the auction. The crowd parted as the horseman drew closer, revealing a broad-shouldered cowboy astride a magnificent chestnut stallion. He dismounted with easy grace, pushing his hat back to reveal a face weathered by sun and wind. His eyes were a piercing blue, and a few days' worth of stubble darkened his strong jaw. He couldn't have been more than 30, but there was something in those eyes that spoke of experiences beyond his years. "What's going on here?" His voice was deep and calm, cutting through the commotion. "None of your business, stranger," Whitmore snapped. "We're conducting a legal transaction." The cowboy's gaze shifted to Rosalie, taking in her bound wrists and the fear in her eyes. "What's her crime?" One of the townspeople spoke up. "She laughed at Whitmore's speech in the saloon last night." The cowboy's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. He looked directly at Rosalie for a long moment, then turned back to Whitmore. "She can laugh at me any day," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. $500. A murmur swept through the crowd. $500 was a small fortune. "What did you say?" Whitmore demanded, his face reddening. "You heard me." The cowboy reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a leather pouch. $500. "I reckon that's enough to satisfy your wounded pride." He approached the platform and poured gold coins into his palm, holding them out for Whitmore to see. The sunlight glinted off the metal, drawing every eye in the square. Whitmore's face contorted with rage, but greed won out. "Sold," he spat, snatching the pouch. "She's yours for a year. Do what you want with her." The cowboy climbed the steps to the platform and approached Rosalie. He drew a knife from his belt, and she flinched, but he only used it to cut the ropes binding her wrists. "Name's Dawson Reed," he said quietly, his voice for her ears alone. "And don't worry, madam. I'm not what you think." Rosalie stared up at him, confusion and fear warring in her expression. "Why would you pay so much for a stranger?" Dawson's mouth curved into a slight smile. Let's just say I have a problem with men who can't take a woman's laughter. He offered his arm. Shall we go? I reckon neither of us is particularly welcome in this square at the moment. With the entire town watching, Rosalie hesitantly placed her hand on his arm and allowed him to lead her down from the platform. Every step felt like walking through a dream, or perhaps a nightmare from which she couldn't wake. My things, she said suddenly. My parents' house, I can't just leave everything. We'll fetch your belongings, Dawson assured her, helping her onto his horse before mounting behind her. Point the way. As they rode through town, Rosalie could feel the weight of stairs following them. She directed Dawson to a small, weathered cabin on the outskirts of Copper Creek. Inside, she hastily gathered clothes, a few cherished books, and the only photograph she had of her parents, wrapping everything in a worn quilt. I'm ready, she announced, clutching her bundle. But uncertainty clouded her features. Mr. Reed, where exactly are we going? I've got a ranch about 2 days' ride from here, he replied, securing her belongings to the saddle. Silver Creek Ranch. It's not much, but it's mine. And what? What will be expected of me there? Rosalie asked, her voice small but determined. Dawson met her gaze directly. Nothing that you don't freely choose to give, Miss Jenkins. I didn't buy you, I bought your freedom from that situation. You can work at my ranch as a housekeeper if you like, for fair wages. Or I can take you somewhere else, if you prefer. But you won't be anyone's property. Rosalie studied his face for any sign of deception, but found none. Still, she'd learned the hard way that men's promises often dissolved like morning mist. Why should I believe you? You shouldn't, not yet, Dawson replied honestly. Trust is earned. But I give you my word, and in time, you'll see it means something. With few options before her, Rosalie climbed back onto his horse. As they rode out of town, she didn't look back at Copper Creek. Whatever lay ahead couldn't be worse than what she was leaving behind. They rode until sunset, making camp beside a small stream sheltered by cottonwood trees. Dawson efficiently set up a small camp, giving Rosalie space while ensuring her comfort. You handled the day's ride well, he commented as he built a fire. Most town folk aren't accustomed to long journeys. My father taught me to ride when I was young, Rosalie replied, watching him work. Before he and my mother died, we used to take trips into the mountains. She paused. Mr. Reed, may I ask why you were in Copper Creek? You said your ranch is 2 days away. Dawson fed small branches to the growing flames before answering. I was delivering some horses to a buyer. Was supposed to meet with him tomorrow, but I reckon that business is finished now. He looked up at her. Don't worry about it. Some things are more important than horse trading. As the fire crackled between them, Rosalie studied her rescuer. In the flickering light, she could see scars on his hands, the marks of a man who worked hard for what he had. His manner was reserved, but not cold. There was a gentleness to him that seemed at odds with his weathered exterior. Are you hungry? He asked, reaching for his saddlebag. It's nothing fancy, just jerky and hardtack, but it'll keep your strength up. Rosalie accepted the offered food gratefully. They ate in silence for a while, the only sounds the crackling fire and the occasional whinny from Dawson's horse. I want to thank you, she finally said, for what you did back there. Not many would have intervened. Dawson's expression darkened. Not many should have to. What Whitmore was doing wasn't just wrong, it was illegal. If there'd been a proper lawman in that town, he'd be the one in trouble. Whitmore practically owns the sheriff, Rosalie explained. He came to town 3 years ago with money from somewhere back east. Started buying up businesses, then land. Now half the town works for him in some way. Men like that, Dawson said quietly. They think their money makes them gods among men. That they can do whatever they please to whoever they please. His jaw tightened. I've seen it before. Something in his tone made Rosalie wonder what experiences lay behind those words, but she didn't press. They were still strangers, after all, regardless of his surprising kindness. You should get some rest, Miss Jenkins, Dawson said, unrolling a bedroll and placing it on the opposite side of the fire from his own. We've got another long day tomorrow. Rosalie settled onto the bedroll, wrapping herself in the blanket he provided. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded her as her mind churned with the day's events and uncertainty about her future. Mr. Reed, she called softly. Yes. I truly am grateful. Whatever your reasons. Thank you. In the darkness beyond the fire's glow, she heard him shift. "Get some sleep, Miss Jenkins. Things will look clearer in the morning." When dawn broke, they continued their journey. The landscape changed gradually, the terrain becoming more varied as they traveled. Dawson pointed out landmarks and shared bits of knowledge about the land, which plants were medicinal, which water sources were safe, how to read the weather from the clouds. "You know a great deal about survival out here," Rosalie observed as they stopped to rest the horse. "Had to learn," he replied. "Been on my own since I was 16. The land doesn't forgive ignorance." "And your family?" A shadow crossed his face. "Lost my pa to the war, my ma to grief after. Had a sister, but we got separated when the farm was sold to cover debts." "I'm sorry," Rosalie said quietly. Dawson shrugged, but his casual gesture couldn't mask the old pain in his eyes. "Life happens that way sometimes. What about you? You mentioned your parents passed 3 years ago. Fever took them both within a week of each other." Rosalie's voice softened with remembered grief. "I sold most of our things to pay for their care and burials. Started working at the saloon because it was the only place hiring. And no other family?" She shook her head. "No one close enough to matter." They remounted and continued riding, falling into a companionable silence. As the day wore on, Rosalie found herself relaxing incrementally against Dawson's solid presence behind her. There was something steadying about him, like a boulder in a rushing stream. By late afternoon, they crested a rise, and Dawson reined in his horse. "There it is," he said, nodding toward the valley below. "Silver Creek Ranch." Rosalie took in the sight with interest. It wasn't as grand as she'd half expected, but it was substantial. A sturdy main house built of timber and stone, a large barn, corrals, and several outbuildings spread across a valley bisected by a gleaming ribbon of water. Herds of cattle grazed on the surrounding grasslands, and in a paddock near the house, several horses milled about. "It's beautiful," she said sincerely. "It's home," Dawson replied, a note of pride in his voice. "Worked 7 years for other men before I could afford to buy this place. Been building it up for the last 5. As they approached, a figure emerged from the barn, a gray-haired man who waved when he spotted them. "That's Roy," Dawson explained. "My foreman. Good man. There's also Diego and Caleb, ranch hands who live in the bunkhouse, and Martha, who comes up from town 3 times a week to cook and clean." They rode into the yard, and Roy approached, his weathered face curious as he took in Rosalie's presence. "Didn't expect you back so soon, boss," he called. "And with company, no less." Dawson dismounted and helped Rosalie down. "Roy, this is Miss Rosalie Jenkins. She'll be staying with us for a while. Miss Jenkins, this is Roy Caldwell, best horse trainer this side of the Mississippi." Roy tipped his hat. "Madam, welcome to Silver Creek." "Thank you," Rosalie replied, suddenly self-conscious of her rumpled appearance after 2 days of travel. "Everything all right while I was gone?" Dawson asked, handing Roy the reins. "Right as rain. That new stallion's still giving us trouble, but we'll break him yet." Roy glanced between them. "I'll take care of Thunder here. You two look like you could use some rest and a hot meal." Dawson nodded gratefully. "Much obliged, Roy." He turned to Rosalie. "Let me show you the house." The main house was simple but comfortable, with solid furniture and clean, if sparse, decor. Dawson showed her to a bedroom at the back of the house. "This can be your room," he said, setting down her bundle of belongings. "Bathroom's down the hall." "I know it's not much, but it's perfect," Rosalie interrupted. "Truly." Dawson nodded, looking slightly uncomfortable for the first time since she'd met him. "I'll, let you get settled. Kitchen's at the end of the hall if you're hungry. Make yourself at home." After he left, Rosalie sank onto the bed, overwhelmed by the events of the past 2 days. She'd gone from being auctioned like livestock to being given a room in a stranger's home. The whiplash of circumstance left her dizzy. Yet as she unpacked her meager belongings and washed the dust of travel from her face, Rosalie felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time: hope. Whatever Dawson Reed's reasons for helping her, he'd shown nothing but respect and consideration so far. Still, she reminded herself to be cautious. Good fortune could turn as quickly as bad, and she'd learned the hard way that depending too much on others was a risk she couldn't afford to take. After refreshing herself, Rosalie made her way to the kitchen, where she found Dawson preparing a simple meal. I hope you don't mind, he said when he noticed her. Martha won't be here until tomorrow, and I figured you'd be hungry. Not at all. Can I help? He handed her a knife and some vegetables, and they worked side by side preparing a stew. There was something comforting about the domesticity of it, Rosalie thought. After years of serving others in the saloon, it felt good to simply cook a meal alongside someone who treated her as an equal. Mr. Reed, she began as they sat down to eat. Dawson, he corrected. If we're going to be living under the same roof, seems silly to stand on formality. Dawson, then, Rosalie agreed. I want to be clear about my position here. You mentioned I could work as a housekeeper? He nodded, spooning stew into his mouth. If that's what you want. Martha only comes 3 days a week, and there's plenty to do around here. I can pay you fair wages same as I'd pay anyone else for the work. That would be acceptable, Rosalie said, relief evident in her voice. Having defined terms made her feel more secure. And, after a year, when my sentence is up, Dawson set down his spoon and looked at her directly. Miss Jenkins, Rosalie, as far as I'm concerned, you're not serving any sentence here. What happened in Copper Creek was wrong, and I just did what any decent person would do. You're free to leave whenever you want. The year Whitmore mentioned means nothing to me. Rosalie stared at him, searching for any sign of deception. Why? She finally asked. Why would you spend so much money and go to so much trouble for a stranger? Dawson was quiet for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Let's just say I've seen what happens when good people stand by and do nothing. I don't aim to be that kind of man. He picked up his spoon again. Besides, $500 is a lot, but freedom is worth more. His simple words resonated with something deep inside Rosalie. She'd been fighting for her freedom and dignity since her parents died, struggling to maintain both in a world that seemed determined to strip them from her. Thank you, she said quietly. I'll work hard to earn my keep. Dawson's mouth curved into a small smile. I don't doubt it. Now eat up before it gets cold. The next few weeks established a rhythm to life at Silver Creek Ranch. True to his word, Dawson treated Rosalie with respect, giving her space and privacy while ensuring she had everything she needed. She took to her housekeeping duties with determination, grateful for work that didn't involve dodging the wandering hands of drunken patrons. Martha, a no-nonsense widow in her 50s, showed Rosalie the particulars of running the household during her visits. Between Martha's guidance and her own initiative, Rosalie soon had the main house running more efficiently than it had in years. Never seen this place so clean, Roy commented one evening as he joined them for dinner. Boss finally found someone who can tame the dust as well as he tames horses. Dawson shot Roy a warning look, but Rosalie just smiled. The dust puts up less of a fight than Mr. Reed's sock drawer. I've never seen such chaos. The men laughed, and Rosalie felt a warm glow of belonging. It had been a long time since she'd been part of easy conversation around a dinner table. As April turned to May, the ranch grew busier. Calving season was in full swing, and everyone worked long hours to ensure the new additions to the herd thrived. Rosalie found herself helping beyond her housekeeping duties, assisting Martha with preparing meals for the cowhands, and even learning to bottle feed orphan calves. One evening, she brought coffee out to the corral where Dawson was working with a particularly stubborn colt. She watched from the fence as he moved with quiet confidence, his movements fluid and assured as he guided the nervous animal around the enclosure. He respects you, she observed when Dawson approached to take the offered cup. Respect's the only thing that works, he replied, taking a grateful sip. You can't force a horse to do what you want, not really. You have to earn its trust, show it you're not a threat. Is that your philosophy with people too? Rosalie asked, thinking of how he'd treated her from the beginning. Dawson considered this, his blue eyes thoughtful. I suppose it is. Force might get you obedience for a time, but never loyalty or trust. He gestured to the colt, now calmly standing nearby. See how he's watching us? A week ago, he'd have been running circles trying to get away. The difference isn't that I broke his spirit, it's that he's learned I won't hurt him. The parallel to her own situation wasn't lost on Rosalie. In the weeks she'd been at Silver Creek, she'd gradually lowered her guard, finding no cause for the wariness she'd arrived with. You're good with them, she said. The horses, I mean. Always had a way with animals, Dawson shrugged. People are harder to figure out sometimes. Some people, Rosalie agreed. thinking of Harold Whitmore and men like him. Dawson leaned against the fence beside her, their shoulders almost touching. Can I ask you something? Of course. That day in Copper Creek. What made you laugh at Whitmore? Rosalie hadn't expected the question. She looked down at her hands, remembering. He was boasting about how he'd single-handedly fought off a bear that was threatening his hunting party, going on and on about his bravery. But I'd overheard the real story from his hunting guide the night before about how Whitmore had actually climbed a tree and screamed like a child while the guide shot the bear. She smiled at the memory. The contrast between his puffed-up tail and the truth just struck me as funny. I didn't mean to laugh out loud. Dawson's lips twitched. I'd have laughed too. It was worth it, Rosalie said suddenly, surprising herself. Even with everything that happened after. Knowing the truth about men like him, seeing through their lies, it's worth something. Dawson studied her face in the fading light. You're stronger than you look, Rosalie Jenkins. The way he said her name sent an unexpected warmth through her chest. I've had to be. They stood in companionable silence for a moment before Dawson spoke again. There's a social in town this Saturday. Dance, food, that sort of thing. The whole ranch is going. You'd be welcome to join us. Rosalie hesitated. She hadn't been to town since arriving at Silver Creek. I don't have anything suitable to wear to a dance. Martha could help with that. She's quite handy with a needle. Dawson straightened up from the fence. Think about it. Might be nice for you to meet some folks besides us dusty ranch hands. As he returned to work with the colt, Rosalie found herself considering his invitation. A social meant music, dancing, new faces, things she'd once enjoyed before life had hardened her. Perhaps it was time to rediscover such simple pleasures. Saturday arrived clear and warm. Martha had indeed helped, altering one of her daughter's dresses for Rosalie, a pretty blue gingham that complemented her chestnut hair and fair complexion. Standing before the small mirror in her room, Rosalie hardly recognized herself. Weeks of good food and honest work had brought color to her cheeks and a sparkle to her eyes that had been missing for too long. When she emerged from the house, Dawson was waiting by the wagon. He'd cleaned up impressively, his usual work clothes replaced by a crisp white shirt, dark vest, and his least worn pair of jeans. He'd even trimmed his beard. When he caught sight of her, he removed his hat, a gesture of respect that touched her. You look lovely, Miss Jenkins, he said, his usual reserve softening into genuine admiration. Thank you, she replied, feeling unaccountably shy. You clean up quite well yourself, Mr. Reed. He helped her into the wagon, his hand warm and steady as it closed around hers. Roy, Diego, and Caleb followed in a second wagon, their good-natured banter filling the air as they set off for town. Silver Creek was a modest but thriving community, larger than Copper Creek and seemingly more prosperous. The social was being held in the town hall, which had been festooned with streamers and lanterns for the occasion. A small band played lively tunes, and tables laden with food lined one wall. Dawson introduced Rosalie to what felt like half the town: the blacksmith and his wife, the general store owner, the schoolteacher, and countless ranchers and farmers from the surrounding area. To her relief, everyone was welcoming, treating her as Dawson's guest without prying into her background. Would you care to dance? Dawson asked as the band struck up a waltz. Rosalie nodded, allowing him to lead her onto the floor. His hand settled respectfully at her waist, and she placed hers on his shoulder. As they began to move with the music, she was surprised by how naturally they fit together. I haven't danced in years, she admitted. You'd never know it, he replied, guiding her smoothly through the steps. You're a natural. As they circled the floor, Rosalie became aware of admiring glances from other dancers. It took her a moment to realize they were looking at her and Dawson together. The thought sent a flutter through her stomach that had nothing to do with nervousness. Several dances later, flushed and laughing, they took a break for refreshments. As Dawson went to fetch them drinks, a friendly-looking woman approached Rosalie. You must be Miss Jenkins, she said warmly. I'm Rebecca Turner, the doctor's wife. I've heard so much about you. You have? Rosalie asked, surprised. Rebecca smiled. Dawson mentioned you were new to the area. It's good to see him with company. He's been alone too long, that one. Before Rosalie could formulate a response to this unexpected comment, Dawson returned with their drinks. The evening continued pleasantly, with more dancing and conversation. Rosalie found herself relaxing completely for the first time in years, enjoying the simple pleasure of community and celebration. As the night drew to a close, they said their goodbyes and headed back to the ranch. The night was clear, stars scattered like diamonds across the velvet sky. In the wagon, Rosalie found herself seated closer to Dawson than strictly necessary, drawn to his warmth in the cool night air. "Did you enjoy yourself?" he asked, his voice low. "Very much," she replied honestly. "Thank you for suggesting it." "The folks seem to take to you," Dawson observed. "Rebecca Turner was singing your praises to anyone who'd listen." Rosalie laughed softly. "She seems to think quite highly of you as well. The Turners are good people. Doc saved my leg last year when a horse threw me into a ravine. Nasty break. Is that how you got the scar?" Rosalie asked, gesturing to a mark visible above his collar. Dawson nodded. "One of many souvenirs from life out here." The conversation flowed easily between them as the wagon rumbled homeward. Rosalie found herself studying Dawson's profile in the moonlight, noting the strong line of his jaw, the slight crinkle at the corner of his eye when he smiled. Something had shifted between them tonight, though she couldn't precisely name what it was. Back at the ranch, Dawson helped her down from the wagon, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. "Thank you for the lovely evening," Rosalie said, suddenly feeling as nervous as a schoolgirl. "My pleasure," he replied, his voice deepening slightly. "Good night, Rosalie." "Good night, Dawson." As she prepared for bed, Rosalie found herself replaying moments from the evening, the warmth of Dawson's hand on hers, the sound of his laughter, the way his eyes had followed her across the room. For the first time since arriving at Silver Creek, she allowed herself to acknowledge that her feelings for Dawson Reed had grown beyond gratitude or friendship. The realization was both thrilling and terrifying. She'd sworn after her parents' deaths that she would rely on no one but herself, that she would never make herself vulnerable to the pain of loss again. Yet here she was, her heart opening like a flower to the sun, drawn to a man who had shown her nothing but kindness and respect. As spring blossomed into summer, life at Silver Creek settled into a pleasant rhythm. Rosalie's duties expanded beyond housekeeping as she discovered aptitudes she hadn't known she possessed. She learned to garden, cultivating vegetables and herbs that enhanced their meals. She became adept at treating minor injuries among the ranch hands, earning Roy's grudging respect for her steady hands and calm demeanor. And through it all, her relationship with Dawson continued to evolve. They still maintained a proper distance, he in his room at one end of the house, she and hers at the other, but their evenings were often spent in shared pursuits. Sometimes they read by the fire, Dawson working through a dog-eared copy of The Three Musketeers, while Rosalie lost herself in one of her cherished books of poetry. Other nights, he taught her to play chess on a beautiful set that had belonged to his father. One particularly warm evening in late June, they sat on the porch after dinner, watching a spectacular sunset paint the western sky in shades of gold and crimson. "I never tire of this view," Dawson remarked, his voice soft with appreciation. "Nor do I," Rosalie agreed. In town, the buildings blocked most of the horizon. "Here, it feels like you can see forever." Dawson glanced at her, his expression thoughtful. "You've changed since you came here." "Have I?" He nodded. "You smile more. Laugh more too." "I have reason to," she said simply. Dawson seemed about to say something more when the sound of approaching hoofbeats drew their attention. A rider was coming fast up the drive, pushing his horse hard despite the fading light. Dawson stood, instantly alert. "That's Diego's horse, but he's riding like the devil himself is on his tail." They hurried down to meet the ranch hand as he reined in his lathered mount. "Boss," Diego called, his face grim. "Trouble coming. Whitmore's men were in town asking about you and Miss Jenkins. Sounds like they're planning to pay a visit." Rosalie felt the blood drain from her face. "Whitmore? How did he find us?" "Word gets around," Dawson said grimly. "Especially when someone's motivated to look." He turned to Diego. "How many men?" "When?" "4 or 5, from what I heard. Planning to ride out at first light tomorrow." Diego dismounted, patting his winded horse. "Roy sent me to warn you while he and Caleb stayed in town to keep an eye on things." Dawson's jaw tightened as he processed this information. "Get some rest, Diego. We'll need to be ready for them." As Diego led his horse toward the barn, Dawson turned to Rosalie, his expression grave. I won't let him take you. The fierce protectiveness in his voice both comforted and concerned her. Dawson, I don't want anyone getting hurt because of me. Perhaps I should just leave. No, he interrupted firmly. Running isn't the answer. Whitmore needs to understand that you're not his property. None of this was legal or right. But what can we do? He has money, influence, so do I, Dawson replied. Maybe not as much as him, but I've made friends in this territory. Good people who stand by their neighbors. He placed his hands gently on her shoulders. Trust me, Rosalie. I won't let any harm come to you. Looking into his determined face, Rosalie did trust him completely, and without reservation, she realized. Somehow, in the months since that fateful day in Copper Creek, this man had become her anchor, her safe harbor in a stormy world. What's the plan? She asked, straightening her shoulders. Dawson smiled slightly, approval warming his eyes. First, we prepare. Then, we stand our ground. They spent the evening making preparations. Dawson sent Diego to alert their closest neighbors, ranchers who had been his friends for years. He checked and cleaned his firearms, a Winchester rifle and 2 Colt revolvers with methodical precision. Rosalie, refusing to be helpless, gathered medical supplies and helped move valuables to safer locations. As they worked, she noticed Dawson watching her with a mixture of admiration and concern. You don't have to stay for this, he told her as midnight approached. I could have Diego take you to the Turner place in town. You'd be safe there. Rosalie shook her head firmly. My whole life, I've been running or hiding from men like Whitmore. Not anymore. This is my home now, and I'll defend it alongside you. Something flickered in Dawson's eyes at her word's surprise, followed by a deeper emotion she couldn't quite name. Your home, he repeated softly. Yes, she said, suddenly certain. If you'll have me, that is. Dawson crossed the room to stand before her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. Rosalie, he began, his voice rough with emotion. The sound of hoofbeats interrupted whatever he had been about to say. They exchanged alarmed glances. Visitors at this hour could only mean trouble. Dawson moved swiftly to the window, peering out into the moonlit yard. His tense shoulders relaxed slightly. It's Roy and Caleb, he reported. And they've brought friends. Outside, they found not only Roy and Caleb but also 4 other men from neighboring ranches, all armed and grim-faced. Figured we'd save you the trouble of waiting for morning, Roy explained. Whitmore and his boys left town right after we did. They're probably camping somewhere along the creek, planning to hit at dawn. How many? Dawson asked. 6 total. Whitmore, his foreman, and 4 hired guns. Mean-looking bunch. Dawson nodded, quickly formulating a plan. With 8 defenders now, including himself and Diego, they had the numbers. He assigned positions around the property, ensuring all approaches were covered. As the men dispersed to their posts, Dawson turned to Rosalie. Stay in the house, he instructed. If shooting starts, get to the root cellar. There's a trapdoor in the pantry. She wanted to argue, but recognized the wisdom in his words. She was no gunfighter, and her presence outside might distract him at a crucial moment. Be careful, she said instead, impulsively reaching up to touch his cheek. Dawson caught her hand, pressing it against his face for a brief, tender moment. I intend to have a very important conversation with you when this is over, he said, his voice low and earnest. So you can be sure I'll take care. The hours before dawn stretched endlessly. Rosalie moved restlessly through the house, checking windows, straining to hear any sound from outside. The stillness was oppressive, broken only by the occasional soft whinny from the horses in the barn. Just as the eastern sky began to lighten, she heard the distant thunder of approaching horses. Moving to the window, she could make out shapes in the pre-dawn gloom, riders coming fast up the road to the ranch. A shout rang out Roy's voice, ordering the approaching party to halt. For a moment, the riders slowed, apparently surprised to find the ranch alert and defended. Then came another voice, arrogant and commanding. Harold Whitmore. Reed, I know you're there. Send out the girl, and we'll leave peacefully. Dawson's reply was measured but carried clearly through the still morning air. Miss Jenkins is under my protection, Whitmore. You have no claim on her. Turn around and go home before this gets ugly. Laughter, cold and mocking. Protection? Is that what you call it? The law says differently. I have a contract, A forced auction isn't a contract, Dawson interrupted. What you did was illegal. Now this is your last warning, leave my property. The tension stretched, taut as a bowstring. From her vantage point, Rosalie could see Whitmore conferring with his men, gesturing angrily. She held her breath, praying they would see reason and depart. Instead, one of Whitmore's men suddenly raised his rifle. A shot cracked through the dawn silence, and chaos erupted. Gunfire exploded from multiple directions as both sides opened fire. Rosalie ducked below the window, heart pounding. The battle seemed to last forever, though in reality it couldn't have been more than a few minutes. Then came a cry of pain that she recognized with horrible clarity, Dawson's voice. Without thinking, Rosalie ran for the door, ignoring his earlier instructions to take shelter. Outside, smoke hung in the air, acrid and thick. Two of Whitmore's men were down, one clutching his shoulder while another lay ominously still. The others had taken cover behind rocks and trees at the edge of the yard. And Dawson was slumped against the corral fence, one hand pressed to his side where blood seeped between his fingers. Rosalie ran to him, heedless of the danger. "Dawson, get back inside," he gritted out, his face pale with pain. "Not without you," she insisted, sliding her shoulder under his arm to support him. Together they staggered toward the house as Roy and the others provided covering fire. Inside, Rosalie helped Dawson to the kitchen table. "Let me see," she demanded, gently moving his hand away from the wound. The bullet had torn through his side, leaving an ugly furrow of torn flesh. It was bleeding heavily but didn't appear to have hit anything vital. "It looks worse than it is," Dawson said, though his clenched jaw betrayed his pain. "Don't try to be brave," Rosalie scolded, already gathering clean cloths and the whiskey bottle they kept for medicinal purposes. "This will hurt." She worked quickly, cleaning the wound with whiskey, which drew a sharp hiss from Dawson before binding it tightly with strips of clean linen. Throughout her ministrations, gunfire continued to exchange sporadically outside. "I need to get back out there," Dawson said, attempting to rise once she'd finished. Rosalie pressed him firmly back into the chair. "You'll do no such thing. You've lost too much blood. My men are handling it," she interrupted. "You're no good to them if you bleed to death." A sudden silence fell outside, more unsettling than the gunfire had been. They exchanged worried glances, straining to hear what was happening. Then came a new voice, authoritative and commanding. "This is Sheriff Marshall. Throw down your weapons." Relief washed over Dawson's face. Turner must have sent for the law when he heard what was happening. More voices outside, the sound of men surrendering, of weapons being collected. Finally, a knock at the door. "Reed? You in there?" "Come in, Sheriff," Dawson called. The door opened to admit a tall, broad-shouldered man wearing a badge. His sharp eyes took in the scene. Dawson wounded, Rosalie standing protectively beside him. "Looks like I missed most of the excitement," the sheriff observed dryly. "Just enough of it," Dawson replied with a pained smile. "How bad is it out there?" "One of Whitmore's men dead, another wounded. None of yours hurt except you, far as I can tell." The sheriff removed his hat. "Want to tell me what this is all about?" Between them, Dawson and Rosalie explained the situation, starting with the events in Copper Creek and ending with Whitmore's arrival that morning. The sheriff listened impassively, occasionally making notes in a small book. "So Whitmore was trying to enforce what he saw as a legal contract, and you were defending what you saw as an illegal imprisonment," he summarized when they'd finished. "That's about the size of it," Dawson agreed. The sheriff sighed heavily. "Well, I can tell you this much: auctioning off a woman for laughing isn't legal anywhere in this territory. But Whitmore's got friends in high places. This could get complicated." "What happens now?" Rosalie asked, her hand unconsciously finding Dawson's shoulder. "Now," the sheriff said, "I take Whitmore and his men back to town. There'll be an inquest into the death and charges to sort out. You two should come in tomorrow once Reed here is well enough to travel. We'll need your formal statements." After the sheriff departed with his prisoners, Roy and the others came in to report. Miraculously, none of Dawson's defenders had been seriously injured. A few scrapes, and one minor bullet grazed that Rosalie quickly tended to. "You boys saved this ranch today," Dawson told them, his voice thick with gratitude. "I won't forget it." Hell, boss," Roy replied gruffly. "What are neighbors for if not to shoot at the occasional land grabber?" His comment broke the tension, and relieved laughter filled the kitchen. As the men dispersed to tend to the horses and repair the minor damage to the property, Rosalie helped Dawson to the parlor sofa where he could rest more comfortably. "You should be in bed," she admonished. "Too far," he replied wearily. "And I want to be where I can hear what's happening." Rosalie arranged pillows behind him and covered him with a blanket. As she made to move away, his hand caught hers. "You were magnificent today," he said softly. "Brave as any man out there." "I was terrified," she admitted. "That's what makes it brave." His blue eyes held hers intently. "Rosalie, before we were interrupted last night, I was about to say something important." Her heart quickened. "Yes. These past months, having you here, it's changed everything. Changed me." Dawson's voice grew husky with emotion. "I know our beginning was unusual, but I've come to care for you more than I thought possible." Rosalie felt tears welling in her eyes. "Dawson, let me finish," he said gently. "I don't want you to stay here out of obligation or gratitude. I want you to stay because you choose to. Because maybe, just maybe, you might feel something for me too." The emotion Rosalie had been holding back for months finally overflowed. "I do," she whispered. "I've been afraid to admit it, even to myself, but I do care for you. Deeply." Dawson's face transformed with joy despite his pain. He tugged gently on her hand, drawing her down beside him on the sofa. With tender care, he brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Then may I court you properly, Miss Jenkins? No contracts or obligations, just a man asking permission to win a lady's heart." Rosalie laughed softly, her tears turning to happiness. "I believe my heart is already won, Mr. Reed. But yes, you may court me all the same." His kiss was gentle, a whisper of promise rather than a demand. Rosalie melted into it, feeling as though she'd finally found her way home after a long, difficult journey. The next day, once Dawson was strong enough to travel, they went to town to give their statements to Sheriff Marshall. The inquest was brief but thorough. Whitmore's surviving men, facing charges themselves, quickly turned on their employer, revealing that he'd planned not just to reclaim Rosalie, but to burn Silver Creek Ranch to the ground as punishment for Dawson's interference. Faced with multiple charges including attempted murder, arson, and unlawful imprisonment, Whitmore's arrogance finally crumbled. The man who had terrorized Copper Creek for years was sentenced to 10 years in the territorial prison. As summer turned to autumn, Silver Creek Ranch flourished. The scandal surrounding Whitmore's arrest had unexpectedly positive consequences for Dawson and Rosalie. Their story, the cowboy who'd rescued a woman from an illegal auction, defended her against all odds, and subsequently won her heart, captured the imagination of the territory. Newspapers as far away as Denver reported on the tale, often embellishing the details, but always painting Dawson as a hero and Rosalie as the worthy object of his affection. Their courtship progressed with sweet inevitability. Dawson proved to be as thoughtful a suitor as he was a rescuer, finding small ways to show his affection: daily wildflowers on her pillow, a hair ribbon from town, a handcrafted bookshelf for her growing collection of books. Rosalie, in turn, thrived in the warmth of his regard, her natural vivacity and intelligence blossoming fully for the first time in years. On a crisp October evening, with the aspens glowing gold against the mountains, Dawson took Rosalie riding to their favorite spot overlooking the valley. As the setting sun painted the landscape in breathtaking hues, he knelt before her. "Rosalie Jenkins," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion shining in his eyes. "Before you came into my life, I thought I had everything I needed. I had my land, my horses, my independence. But now I know what was missing." He produced a small ring, a delicate silver band set with a single pearl. "You've brought laughter and light into my world. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Tears of joy spilled down Rosalie's cheeks as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "With all my heart, yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose to gather her in his arms. Their kiss was tender at first, then deepened with the promise of the life they would build together. The wedding took place on Christmas Eve, with the ranch house decorated with evergreen boughs and red ribbons. Judge Turner, the doctor's brother, performed the ceremony before a gathering of friends and neighbors. Rosalie wore a gown of ivory satin that Martha and Rebecca Turner had helped her make, with lace at the collar and cuffs that had once belonged to Dawson's mother. I never thought I'd find a love like this, Rosalie said softly as they shared their first dance as husband and wife. Especially not after that day in Copper Creek. Dawson smiled, drawing her closer. I thank God every day for your laughter, Mrs. Reed, even if it did get you into trouble. The best kind of trouble, she replied, her eyes sparkling with happiness. The kind that led me to you. As the years passed, Silver Creek Ranch prospered under their joint care. Dawson's skill with horses and Rosalie's head for business proved a formidable combination. They expanded their holdings, built a larger house, and welcomed 3 children who grew up strong and sure in the shadow of the mountains. And through it all, Rosalie's laughter rang free and often in their home, across their land, and especially when directed at her husband, who never tired of hearing it. The sound of her joy became as much a part of Silver Creek as the rushing water and the whispering pines, a testament to a love that had begun with an auction and a cowboy who had seen her true worth from the very beginning. On their 20th anniversary, as they sat on the porch of their home watching their children play with the ranch dogs in the yard, Dawson turned to his wife with a smile that still made her heart skip. Do you ever think about that day, he asked, when Whitmore tried to sell you for laughing at him? Rosalie leaned her head against his shoulder, her hand finding his with the ease of long familiarity. Sometimes, it seems like another lifetime now. You know, Dawson said reflectively, I meant what I said that day. You can laugh at me any day, Rosalie Reed. And she did, her laughter ringing clear and true across the valley they both called home, not in mockery, but in the pure joy of a love that had conquered fear, defied convention, and built a life more beautiful than either of them had dared to dream.